folks, it's 4 o'clock Eastern and you know what time it is. It's time for another episode of Student Affairs Live, your weekly web show about student affairs topics for student affairs professionals. I'm your host, Eric Stoller, and today we have an awesome show. We are super excited. We've got all kinds of news. We have a great guest, great topic, and I gotta tell you, it's going to be an awesome time. The weather is fantastic here in the greater Boston area, and we are all set to go. So folks, once again, this is Student Affairs Live, your weekly web show. If you have a question, if you want to share some resources, please use the SA Live hashtag. That's right, it's huge today. #SA Live. That is our hashtag for success on Twitter. We'll be asking your questions live on the air to our guest today, who, by the way, is a professor in a student affairs department. So it's really excited. He's in the College of Education. I'm probably getting all this wrong because I'm not reading his bio, but we'll get it figured out later on. I'll read it verbatim. It'll be correct then. Folks, Student Affairs Live is part of the Higher Ed Live network. Feel free to follow at Higher Ed Live. That is our Twitter account. Ardith, our amazing intern, is tweeting away today via the at Higher Ed Live Twitter account. So feel free to use the hashtag SA Live. Tweet at Higher Ed Live, lots of resources, all kinds of fun. Folks, Student Affairs Live would not be possible without support from our awesome sponsor, Integral. By the way, we're commercial free because of Integral. So let me tell you this, we're sponsored by Integral, the creators of the Schools app on Facebook. Be sure to check out their webinar series about how they can help you leverage Facebook to increase yield and retention. And that happens this Friday at 2 p.m. Eastern. We're sending out a tweet with that link right now. So folks, I like to do a little feature on the show, a little homage to one of my favorite student development theorists, if you will. And that feature, as you know, it's called Challenge and Support. That's right, our version of the news here on Student Affairs Live. And let me tell you, there is never a shortage of news in higher education, so let's get into it. First thing today that I saw comes from Inside Higher Ed, my favorite online news source, of course. As a blogger for them, I might have a little bit of bias. Article, love the title, Back in Blackout, kind of reminds me of AC/DC. However, what I don't like, the topic, the subject of the article. Harrisburg University of Science and Technology once again has resumed their ban on social media sites. They did this last year, it seemed kind of gimmicky, and this year they're doing it again. And you know, Eric Dard, their provost, you know, it's almost more of a publicity scheme. It seems like they're doing it really just to get some publicity, some pop from the news channels. You know, they're shutting off social media, yet everybody on social media is talking about them. And he makes some interesting claims about social media addiction and whatnot. And last year, though, a ton of their students and faculty and staff found ways around this blockade. And so it really, I take umbrage with it yet again, as I said last year. Another interesting news story comes courtesy once again from Inside Higher Ed. Some research that the folks did at Inside Higher Ed on admissions. They did sort of a survey of admissions directors, and it's really interesting. You know, the first bullet point here talks about something that's really troubling. It says, for many colleges, a top goal of admissions directors is recruiting more students who can pay more. And that is a big deal because we always talk about students paying less, access to education, financial aid, leveraging things like scholarship, financial aid, grants, etc. So really interesting data there. I haven't had a chance to sort of chew through it, but I got to tell you, there's some interesting stuff coming out of that survey about sort of the state of admissions in higher education and what's going on with that. Segueing back to social media, seems like that's a theme for today's show. Got this from the Houstonian, from the folks at Sam Houston University. They have a proposed sort of social media policy on campus, and the wording, the language behind it, it's a little vague, and so the folks at Sam Houston, they were a little upset about this because basically the university was saying that they had a lot more control over student organizations and what student organizations were saying on things like Twitter and Facebook and blogs, that type of thing. And so vague language in terms of what the university can do, cannot do, and some folks there really weren't too happy with it. So the faculty senate got involved, and so it's kind of an ongoing story right now out of SHSU. Really troubled by something I read today from the Associated Press about Brooklyn College and some stuff going on in New York City. It seems that sort of in partnership with the New York Police Department, the CIA has been sort of infiltrating Muslim student organizations. And basically trying to see if there's something going on, whatnot, and really, this is really troubling, really problematic. How Muslim students being targeted in New York City, and citing things like militant paintball trips. Well, if other student organizations went on a paintball trip, would it be called militant? I don't think so. And so read that story, make your own conclusions, but I'm really troubled by it. I think it's pretty disgusting. And the language from the folks at the NYPD says that they don't do this type of thing, when it sounds like they were the ones who notified some of the college's administrators to begin with that this was happening. All right, folks, sorry about that. I think we had a bit of a technical glitch on our end. Apologies, as usual, whenever we have a audio-video glitch. And you know what? Folks, we're using the internet here. It's kind of a wild ride. We do our best. So again, thanks for hanging with us. We got it under control now. All right, last bit of news, just to finish up here. Folks, I like QR codes. QR codes have potential. You put them on posters, people scan things, they can maybe find out about events, put some stuff in their phone, maybe you take folks to optimize content for their mobile device. But the folks at Washington and Lee University who work in their sort of IT services, they just jumped the shark with QR codes. They put at least 9 QR codes. There might be more QR codes on the back of this t-shirt here, but they put QR codes all over this t-shirt and said, okay, students, if you have a question, you want to get some more information, come up and scan this shirt that's on someone. I'm sorry, what? That is just a ridiculous use. Who's going to go up to someone's navel with a cell phone and scan their belly button right where that QR code is? That is just going to be awkward, look ridiculous, and there are way better uses for this type of technology. And in a way, when you use it like this, you make it so easy for other people to say this technology shouldn't exist in the first place because it's ridiculous. So please put QR codes in better places. Save them for print media. Save them for things that that should have QR codes on them. My gosh, leave them off of clothing. Thank you. That's my soapbox for that issue. All right, folks. Now is the time of the show where I like to give my unsolicited shout out of the week. It goes to a person, place, thing, association, service, etc. And I was looking around the web and I was thinking, okay, who am I going to get a shout out to this week? And I thought, you know what? I'm not just going to give a shout out to one person, one association, etc. I'm going to give this week's unsolicited shout out to 2 people. All right, so this week's unsolicited shout out of the week goes to 2 people. Sorry if this is a little too small, but we'll get the links out there in a second. It goes to Anne-Marie Klotz for saying, hey, people. Guess what? She posted this on Facebook. Facebook is a free surface. Get over it, all right? Everybody's just complaining and blowing up today about how Facebook made some big changes, etc. You know what? It changes. We float with it. We use it. Keep moving. The next shout out goes to Julie Larson. I love Julie's tweet today about the NASPA annual conference. She said, hey, shout out to NASPA Tweets for a solid list of speakers for the 2012 convention. You kept your word to address issues of diversity/justice. You know what? A lot of people have been critiquing the folks at NASPA for holding their annual conference in Phoenix next year. I really enjoyed Julie's view on that issue and that conference. So kudos to Anne-Marie Klotz and Julie Larson today for being the unsolicited shout-outs of the week, because I really enjoyed what they had to say and just their point of view. All right, folks. Awesome show today. I've got an amazing guest. I'm bringing up his bio right now. It's a rather long piece of text, so I want to make sure I get it right. And I'm going to turn his sound on, so if he wants to yell at me while I'm saying his bio, he can. Let me just get that going here. Once again, Student Affairs Live is held together with bubblegum and duct tape. Only the best for us. All right. My guest today is Will Barratt. And Will Barratt is a professor in the Department of Educational Leadership at Indiana State University, where he teaches student affairs and higher education master's students and higher education leadership doctoral students. His current academic interests include social class on campus and student learning outcomes. And one of his past areas of writing was on information technology in student affairs and higher ed. And he has a lifelong interest in matters of religion, spirituality, and meaning-making that he credits to his upbringing and ongoing identity as a Unitarian Universalist and his philosophy and history majors at Beloit College. So, Will Barratt, welcome to Student Affairs Live.
Well, thank you. It's always a treat to be here. What a longtime fan, first-time caller.
Exactly. You're
Although
brand new.
I think we were chatting yesterday, and I commented that is this like the new Wayne and Garth?
It totally is, right? It's our own access television. We're running it out of someone's basement,
Yep.
And this is the way to go. So, hey, Will, you brought you on the show today to talk about something that I know is near and dear to my own heart, because I'll just put it out there. I self-identify as an atheist, and I work in higher education. I work in student affairs, and I read your piece that was in ACPA's Developments. ACPA puts out this publication online, and it was about, let me just pull up the title here so I get it right. A Seat at the Table for Atheists, Negotiating Inclusion and Religious Pluralism, a Personal Narrative. And I really felt like this is an article that needs to be discussed in sort of a more public format. And so, please, welcome to the show. And you know, today's topic, we could just go at it from many different angles. So I think first of all, I'd just like to sort of put it out there and sort of say, you know, what is atheism? Let's define some terms so folks kind of have a foundation to start from.
Like with anything, there's a nuanced range of, you know, hard atheists and soft atheists merging into agnostics. But the kind of question is, you know, how do you define dark? Atheism, unfortunately, gets defined as a lack. I don't believe in a deity, a spirituality, a higher power. You know, I believe in the ultimate uncaring universe. That's as far as I'm willing to go in my belief structure. There is a lot written out there. The Wikipedia has got some wonderful entries and good information. There are associations, international groups that talk about this. But for me, it's essentially, I just don't believe.
Yeah, well, and I think people are trying to call you right now to ask you questions.
Guys, I hear my phone's in the background, but I'm not going to answer.
It's okay. We'll just pull the cord out one of these times when I'm full screen or something. So I guess for me, really, coming up through a student affairs graduate program, you yourself teaching in one, why is atheism something that seems like we don't talk about it that much in higher ed?
And I think that's probably the key question, and that's part of what motivated me to write the article. Defina Lazarus-Stewart, who is head of the Commission on, I always get the names in the wrong order, Religion, Spirituality, and Meaning, deeply spiritual woman, and I love to have conversations with her. We began to talk about the larger circle being more and more inclusive. There is this very peculiar attitude towards atheists in this country, anyway. I would assume it's universal. In a Pew in a Pew Foundation study, this is the group that most Americans share the least values with. We kind of have a 15% approval rating, which is remarkably low. It's way lower than any other group which is actively pillared. So there's not, you know, there's not the books out, there's not the literature. So, you know, as an educator, I can't say, okay, go read this book or whatever. The other reality is that we're in a minority, and I think it's important to support the spiritual ventures of my students, of the faculty I know, of the people I know, because that's really important to them. In a recent survey, I pull up I think I sent you the reference yesterday, but it was on Higher Education Research Institute National Study of College Students' Search for Meaning and Purpose. You can pull it up. It was a fabulous study. But 15% of the students identify as with no religion. That makes it the second largest group on campus, right after Catholics. So this is an important minority group. It is important to be inclusive, and if you really want to be inclusive, you need to step out of the religious tradition. You know, so often people coming from the privilege of the majority position think, oh, if we include one group, aren't we being inclusive? Well, no.
I apologize. Will has been extremely patient and gracious with me here as I've tried to get everything working. The squirrels that power Student Affairs Live and the hamsters in the little wheels apparently destroyed everything. So we are back on the air. And Dana McNulty, you are not the only one to lose the stream. I myself lost the stream, and so did everyone else, unfortunately. So we are back on the air. Hopefully Ardith will tweet something as Higher Ed Live to let me know that we're back on the air and that I'm not just talking to a vacuum. So, Will, we're talking about higher education, atheism, student affairs. Again, we could talk about many different things, many different angles, and apparently we are back on the air. So thanks, Ardith, for tweeting that out. So I guess one of my questions is, if atheism isn't in the literature, if it's not mentioned, when we talk about multicultural affairs in higher education and student affairs, oftentimes we talk about race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, ability, disability, class,
social class.
Yeah, I was getting there. Just wait for it. Wait for it. A guy from Iowa, from the country. All right, I'll get there. But we don't talk about the inclusion of, like you said earlier, how do you define the dark? We don't talk about including atheists in that conversation of multiculturalism when, like you said earlier, before the show went down, we're a minority. We're a significant minority.
But we're one of the largest minority groups. So,
Exactly.
that argument doesn't work. That, there aren't very many of them. Well, no. On the planet, there are a substantial number. On campus, there's a substantial number. And I think it's almost the perfect storm. There's a lack of literature, and there's an attitude. I don't think it's conscious on many people's parts, but we are among the least trusted of all groups in the United States. But I think I've come to understand why. So many of my churched friends and people I've talked to, they're told that the only thing between them and the world of evil and sin is their religion. So, it's a great marketing ploy for religion. But if there's nothing between then me and sin and degradation, I must be living the life of sin and degradation. Well, that's just not true. I make choices the same way others make choices. I go to church every week on Sunday. I don't pray, and we can have a nice discussion on the nature of prayer. But there is this sense among many of my church colleagues that the only thing protecting them from evil is their religion. I don't have that protection, therefore, I'm cast in some very odd characteristic. And so there's some personal stuff going on there, I think, often at a very unconscious and very subtle level. So I think that's an important point. And one of the problems that happens is religion and spirituality is really important to people, and it's important that everybody respect that and respect each other's religions. But what happens is when the atheists speak, people feel religion challenged, therefore they feel personally challenged, and associate atheists with anti-religious, anti-theists. I am by no means an anti-theist. I see the power of spirituality in my students' lives, in my colleagues' lives, and it's incredibly important to them. Let's go with that. Let's build on that, and let's use it for good and not evil. As long as you're doing good stuff, I'm behind you. So there's some attitudinal stuff. There's a lack of literature. So this is one of those things that people are uncomfortable about and can get away with, because I don't know too many evangelical atheists.
Right, we're out there spreading the word.
They're coming, knocking on your door for no particular reason.
Hey, folks, if you have a question for Will and I, please feel free to use the hashtag. I just put it up on the screen again. I know we probably lost a good portion of folks, but you know what? We'll put the archive up on the web after the show, just in case we have any show left that we can sort of resurrect, no pun intended, to put it up there on the web. And you said earlier, you said that atheists are distrusted,
Yes.
and that part of that comes from the core belief system of certain folks. That's just a survey, right? There, a lot of times.
An incredibly large survey
Yeah.
from the Pew Foundation on religion and American life. So I mean, this is in spite of what people say, this is what the research says.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me it's classic sort of othering behavior. It's the
Yes.
sort of reincarnation of othering in margin to center, right? You've got folks who believe being in the center, and those that are seen as not being believers sort of on the sides.
And I think that does also reflect a general ignorance on the part of many people about what atheism is about. And I've heard all kinds of things. And if you go out on any of the websites where there's humor, there's the fights between the theists and the atheists. But most of it is just a really misunderstanding of what we do and who we are. I mean, I give a lot of money to my church. I go on Sunday. I've served on the board, all that sort of stuff. Well, why do you go to church, Will? Well, the same reason you do, for the search for meaning and companionship and fellowship. There are many people I know who go for spiritual guidance also, and that's cool. So there's a lot of misunderstanding about, what this choice means.
Yeah. Well, it seems like you mentioned the community aspect. That's something I think that when someone says that I'm an atheist and someone else says I'm not,
cool.
and they get that sort of sense of, but I think they get that sense of you're trying to take away something from them, and that sense,
yes.
Big part of that is that sense of community. Atheists don't have a large facility of which
right.
to gather on Sundays.
Well, there are many denominations at which you are not welcome, and many denominations at which you are welcome, which is interesting. So we don't have meetings. That I know of that I go to. There are probably meetings of the American Atheist Association or whatever. I am not a member. I have no interest in joining that because I'm not evangelical. This is my choice, and it's my choice. So yeah, we don't get together. We don't write books and pamphlets. We don't come knock on your door, and so there's a lot of uninformation, which gets turned, of course, into misinformation.
Well, we have a question from
Sure.
Usra Ghazi. How should campuses engage with atheists and secular students who organize events like Everybody Draw Muhammad Day? And I'm going to let you field this one, but I have my own thoughts that I would.
I have my own thoughts, and I love the question, and I love her picture up there. My tweet deck thing is over here, so I keep looking.
Oh, okay.
First of all, what would motivate me to have everyone draw Muhammad Day? That's offensive. That is offensive to so many people, and I understand that's offensive. I'm not anti-religious. I just don't. Anyone who wants to get together and let's draw Muhammad Day, that's a really bad idea. And we need to have a lot of education about what this is and what this means, and how in the Abrahamic tradition, the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition, there's all kinds of stuff about icons and imagery. Go read the Ten Commandments, go read the Quran, and you'll understand why you just shouldn't do this for a variety of reasons.
Well, I think it's easy to lump a group of people. If one person does something who's a member of a certain group identity, and you label the entire group as being
right.
negative or bad. And I think for those groups on campus that engage in those types of activities, they're giving atheists a bad name because they're engaging in hurtful, hateful activity.
They're anti-religious.
Yeah.
I mean, and I would have, all my atheist friends would have no motivation to go do this because we just don't particularly care one way or the other. I don't hate any religion. There's no reason to. It's irrelevant in my life. So this is the kind of behavior that I would see from the religiously ignorant of another religion. And there are enough varieties, there's enough hate out there that I think it's a particularly bad idea to go, intentionally offend another group. And I also think it's a bad idea to intentionally offend and ignore the non-believers. I mean, there are significant numbers of us. So, where's the programming to talk about meaning that is bereft of Scripture? That's a great conversation. One of my good friends at church was a Naval Chaplaincy Corps, was a commander in the United States Navy, was a chaplain in prisons, is doing a series on the parables of Jesus. I'm busy whenever she does that, but I really want to go because these are fabulous stories that enrich my life.
Mm-hmm. Well, and again, I think the question too is when a member or a group that's marginalized on campus then goes and enacts horizontal hostility towards another group that's marginalized on campus. Nobody's doing anybody any good.
None.
And I think that's where advisors to student groups need to step in and really fill that role of being a mentor and a true advisor, as opposed to, I know a lot of atheists who I would describe as sort of being militant atheists, and their sort of raison d'etre is to go out and tear down other people's beliefs. Well, that's the fringe element that exists in almost every group, religious or not religious.
I have people knocking on the door to get me to believe this or that. But I want to bring up the three basic principles of the Buddha Dasa. First is that all people strive to realize the heart of their own religion, and I don't think enough people do that. The second is that all people develop a good understanding of the essential principles among the religions. I would add, and the non-religions. And three, that all people liberate themselves from the power of materialism. Yeah, that's also cool too. But there is a lot of literature out there that says, learn what your group says, learn what the other group says. You know, for me, the fascinating arguments between Christians is just endless. I find it curious that groups that share so much in common find a reason that's, from my perspective as an outsider, so minor to cause disagreements. But we have another question I saw out there.
It looks like it was just another like a retweet or something, or
Thank
at least
you.
it's not coming in necessarily on my screen. But
Okay.
today, folks, I got to tell you, today this ship called Student Affairs Live has had a bit of a rocky trip, so who knows if I'm going to see everything. So I'm here with Will Barratt. We're talking about atheism in higher education. We're taking questions via the Essay Live hashtag. And one of the questions I have for you, Will, is in student affairs, especially in my experience in the field, we tend to conflate spirituality with religion. And that, to me, seems like it's just going to cause us all sorts of problems. What are your thoughts about that?
Back in the day, I had been pursuing some research around the area of spirituality, working with a couple of my students. There's a lot of wonderful stuff, but the classic research definition is spirituality is something that you have, religion is an organization. So if you think of religion as, you know, the church, the organization, the group, the body that meets in a home, but the spirituality is what you bring to the table, your sense of your own place in the spirited universe. So yeah, we do conflate spirituality. There are a lot of very spiritual people who don't find comfort in a church, in a religion, and there are people who do. So religion as an organization is one of the ways to think about it, and it makes the most sense to me. There are probably other good definitions, but religion as an organization, spirituality is you and your belief.
How do we insert that, though, into the dialogue that's being, presented or represented in the curricula in various grad programs? It seems to me that that's not out there.
Well, again, it comes back around to this idea of religious privilege. And I remember the first time I saw at one of the national conferences, I think it was ACPA, but I'm not sure, Greg Alimo, Jamie Washington, and I can't remember the other two. It was fabulous. But the first time I just saw this concept, Christian privilege. And it is such a majority thing. There's so much affiliation between student affairs and spirituality and religion. For many of our colleagues, myself included, student affairs is part of the work, capital T, capital W. This is the meaning I want to make of my life. This is the purpose I want to have in helping people to liberate themselves from ignorance, learn enough so that they don't have let's go draw Muhammad day. So there is a historical affiliation there. And there are many groups that just kind of move that forward without really questioning their point of privilege as a Christian, as a Protestant Christian. I'm pretty sure those groups tend to exclude whatever they consider not Protestant Christians. So it does play a huge role in student affairs, but it plays an interesting role that we need to continually question. But there is this centrist Christian privilege majority. And I always maintain that majority is a hard and intellectually dangerous place to be because you don't get those challenges which lead to growth. My students last year were going to buy me a big wooden spoon because my job in class is to stir the pot. Yes, this is my job, is to provide you with contrast, to provide you with challenge. So if you're just going to hang out with people like you, that's fine, but you're not going to continue to grow. And so I think that's one of the reasons to make sure we do include all traditions and the non-tradition as we talk about spirituality in higher education.
Well, by the way, Jordan Toy says that you constantly stir the pot, so that's
Yes,
an affirmation there. I want to talk about state schools a little bit because
Okay.
You've got the banner from Indiana State.
Right.
I used to work at Oregon State University. I also worked at University of Illinois at Chicago, and there was an example at UIC. There were people who were upset, I guess, if you will, or maybe I can't remember. Maybe it was at UIC or perhaps another state institution. They were upset about the Muslim Student Association wanting to have foot washing basins in some of the restrooms facilities. Totally made sense. You know, when you're washing your feet with a standard level sink, it's ridiculously hard, and people were, you know, just really, you know, getting upset about this. And I kept saying to myself, but you have no issue with all these Christmas trees in the Union.
The Supreme Court has held that the Christmas tree is not a religious symbol. So this is legal for us to have Christmas trees. And again, Christian privilege is kind of pervasive. You know, I'm just pleased that the Christians stole this tradition from another group before them. But all groups do that. I'm not picking particularly on one. But if anything to do with the cleanliness of feet were an inherent part of the majority religious tradition in this country, we would have foot washing basins in all of our bathrooms. Being a member of the majority, having that privilege, you don't see those kind of accommodations which are built into the very fabric of your schedule. How many state schools have holidays that just correspond with traditional Christmas holidays? Right. With traditional religious holidays, exactly. Easter and all of that, you know, and you know, then they'll pick one minor Jewish holiday and say, "Oh, we have a Hanukkah bush." That's not even an important holiday. You know, yes, I love the tradition. Yes, I do have a mezuzah at home. You know, the whole 9 yards, lighting those candles, realizing that this has been happening for 3,000 years. Yeah, that's kind of cool. I mean, that connects me with, you know, purpose and meaning and tradition as a human being. But the Christians and the people in the majority, it's difficult for them to see, and as it's difficult for me to see white privilege and male privilege and old guy privilege. Yeah, I mean, I'm an old white guy. I get all kinds of stuff, and I have to constantly strive to make sure, you know, this is not something that comes to me automatically as a majority. Christians, the majority, particularly at state schools, need to really be aware of what their tradition gives them and how it disenfranchises another group.
Right. Well, do you think because atheism is an identity that is unseen? You know,
yes.
You can quote unquote pass on campus and no one knows. And
yes, we can walk in the daylight. We can pass
right,
them
exactly.
without notice.
Well, and it's good analogy. We're also folks who our identity is framed as we've gotten older. You know, it's an identity of the mind, in a belief. And I think that many folks that I know who identify as an atheist were raised, you know, religiously. They were based in a church, you know, Christian, Jewish, etc. So I think that that's a thing too. That's really hard for people to speak up in higher ed about being atheist, because even though there's a significant percentage, but when you look at the mainstream media and, like you said, the data about distrust and being disliked, it's an extremely marginalized identity, and it seems to me that we're not talking enough about it.
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's a tough topic. This is a difficult conversation, and there's some wonderful writers who talk about having difficult conversations, whether it's about gender or about religion, and religion tends to be very, very touchy. I lived in Beijing, China for a year, you know, among the godless communists. Marvelous people, just, you know, they didn't have the protection of religion, and yet they do all right. So I would, as a foreigner, go do lectures at various campuses and speak in evening classes, mostly for them to hear English. But my favorite question after one class in Shenyang, up in northern China, the woman came up and said, "Why do so many Westerners believe in God?" And I thought this so contextualized her within a world in which religion was not the norm. And it just warmed my heart and put stuff into perspective. The same as a Christian student saying, you know, why do we have foot basins here? Well, it's not part of your tradition to have foot basins. Why do so many people not believe in God in the United States? Excuse me. Her question, why do so many people believe in God, made sense in her tradition. She was curious why people would build a church or all of the things that the religious do. So much of this is contextualized. That context becomes normal, and we're uncomfortable with the deviant, right? We're not normal.
Yeah, whatever deviates, right? And then
whatever deviates.
Exactly.
But again, I mean, one of the wonderful things about student affairs is there's this sense that we have, you know, let's have honest conversation and let's be inclusive. And I know that's not the case in all disciplines, but it is one of the things that just keeps me going in student affairs. Is we're ready to go into these kinds of conversations, and this is the place that it's going to happen on campus. While the religion department or the philosophy department or the ethics department, might do some stuff, I think it's going to have to come out of the student affairs folks who really deal with the intimate lives of the students. Students are coming to college, they're changing. Many are becoming religious, many are becoming unreligious. And that's something we need to talk about. Not just those becoming religious, but those who are going through their own crises and making their own positive choice not to believe any longer. There's not a lot of support there. And I think there is this feeling. I mean, you feel it and I feel it. I never had violence against me, but I really know the face of hate. Yeah.
Well, and a friend of mine who is, she identifies as intersex, queer. She's Jewish. Lots of tattoos, lots of piercings. The kind of person that visually, rhetorically is super radicalized in her rhetoric and how she identifies. Right. Says to me, "You're an atheist. That's all you've got." And I just kind of laughed and I said, that's true.
Yeah, I'm sorry I can't belong to as many deviance clubs as you do, and that's cool.
But again, I think there's that air or that sense of passing.
Yes.
I can walk into any space and everyone assumes that I'm not an atheist generally, and they assume that I'm going to know the traditions and the sort of the nuances and whatnot. And I largely do because that's how I was raised, and so I can sort of float through those spaces. But it seems like it's a largely sort of untapped identity in terms of research, conversation, and again, I think that it's scary to it's almost like the process of coming out. If you were a lesbian or a gay person, you have that same sort of sense of trepidation.
When I wrote the article that kind of started this conversation, that was part of the process. Am I willing to come out publicly? And really had to think about it. And yes, it will trouble me. Somebody will find this out. I sent a note to my PR department on campus and to my dean saying, I'm doing this. So when and if you get the calls, know this. So there's some fear on my part in coming out in this way. But a student just yesterday, when I was talking about coming on your show, she said, one of her residents came up to her and said, well, you're churched, but can I tell you this? And there was the assumption on the student's part that, of course, she was churched. So there's this assumptive notion we have of Christian privilege.
Exactly. Well, it's just very similar to when someone assumes that someone is white, or that
right.
when they assume that they're of color.
I have a colleague who is a brilliant scholar, fabulous teacher, but she's tall, African American, and as a student, people assume, well, don't you play basketball? Again, it's all this assumptive stuff of stereotyping, and again, one of the great things about student affairs is we do seek to go beyond that.
Well, a question just comes to me about our associations. We have various knowledge communities and
right.
The commissions, for example, and other associations. I don't know of any that sort of say in their language, atheism is included.
The group, the ACPA Commission for Religion, Spirituality, and Meaning, does have a statement in there that's inclusive. And I remember years ago having a long chat with Defina Stewart about that, and she said, well, yeah, I think we need to do that. And there are several people who go there, particularly to represent that point of view. Nice. And so I think that is a spot. But again, I would much rather let's just talk about how you make meaning in your life and what you base this on. You make choices, I make choices. We probably actually read the same books.
Right. We eat the same food.
Yeah. I read that Old Testament and New Testament and the Quran and the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita, etc., and the sayings of the Compassionate Buddha, etc. Great stuff, all of it.
So I guess the question then is, when are you going to write a text for student affairs?
No, I've got the book I've got a book out on social class on campus, And I'm not a quick writer. I mean, I wish I had the skill of George Koo and some of the folks who can just crank out really cool stuff in a brief period of time. But I use writing as a way to clarify, and I'm not so sure I want to do that again.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show, and I really appreciate that you let us share your article that you wrote for ACPA Developments. I think that if anyone in student affairs is looking for sort of an introductory piece to read, in addition to some of the other stuff that you sent me that we'll tweet out here in a bit, it's just some good resources, gets people thinking, keeps the conversation going. And
I'm going to give a shout out, and I did not know of this article before I wrote it, but Bob Nash, who's also student affairs faculty, in 2003 in the Journal of Religion and Education, had Inviting Atheists to the Table, a Modest Proposal for Higher Education. Unknowingly, I apologize. I didn't rip off your title. I just didn't know this was there. I just found it a couple of weeks ago. So there's stuff out there, and there's also a Kathleen Goodman and John Miller piece in the Chronicle in January 2009, Atheist Students on Campus from Misconception to Inclusion. So there is a tradition of this being talked about. But again, okay, in 8 years, we're talking 2 pieces?
Right. Right, that's a pretty slim pickings when it comes to availability of literature, and I think that maybe there needs to be more in this Journal of Student Development, the College and Character, the journals that are out there.
College and Character, I think that would be a lovely challenge for them to begin to approach this, because I mean, I know you make meaning of your life, I make meaning of my life.
Exactly. Well, Will, thanks for being on the show. I really appreciate it, and thanks for being patient with us as we sort of underwent the technical difficulties today.
Happy to help. Happy to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thanks, Will. So, folks, this was sort of an abbreviated show in a way, just because of the technical glitches that we ran into. So thanks for sort of bearing with us. So for next week's show, I've got another topic, obviously, that's going to be interesting. We're going to talk about the DREAM Act. And Vic Johnson from NAFSA is going to come on, and we're going to talk about why NAFSA has been so vocal about their support of the DREAM Act, and they put things on their blog, on their website. They've sent me press releases, and so we're really going to get into it with the DREAM Act, what it means for folks in higher education, what it means for folks that work in student affairs. Once again, Student Affairs Live, not afraid of the heavy-hitting controversial topics, so we're going to do our best to dig into it and hopefully avoid any technical difficulties. So folks, once again, we are sponsored by Integral. We are commercial free because of those folks, and they actually have a webinar that's this Friday at 2 p.m. and it's about their application that they created called the Schools app. It runs on Facebook, and it will help you in your efforts for retention, student yield, student engagement, etc. And so the folks at Integral sponsor Student Affairs Live. We couldn't do the show without their love and support, and so I want to thank them again. Folks, this has been Student Affairs Live, and my name is Eric Stoller, and we will see you next week at the same time, same place. Thank you.